I never imagined my life would turn out this way. 15 years of marriage, built on what I thought was trust, shattered in an instant. I walked into our bedroom, the place I used to call my sanctuary, only to find my wife tangled up with another man. My blood boiled at the sight of them. There they were, completely unaware, wrapped up in each other, right in our bed. The bed we shared. The bed I thought symbolized our love. It felt like the whole world crumbled beneath me at that moment. I stood there frozen, rage consuming me from the inside out. Every lie she told, every time she smiled at me while hiding this betrayal, it all came crashing down at once. She thought I would be weak, that I would let this slide. But no, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. That day, I made a promise to myself. I would make her pay for the pain she caused me. She would regret ever thinking she could do this to me and get away with it. It has been 10 long years since I last came back to this small town. 10 years since I left everything and everyone behind, swearing never to return. But now, here I was, pulling up to my childhood home for the first time in a decade. The reason? My father had passed away. A man I had barely spoken to since I left. A man who, in his own way, had tried to reconcile things between me and my wife, thinking we could work it out. My dad was a good man, but I could never get over how much he sided with her, how much he pushed me to forgive when I had nothing left to give. I parked the car in front of the house and leaned back in my seat for a moment, staring at the familiar surroundings. Everything looked just as it did when I left, but it felt so foreign. It was the end of autumn, and the air was colder now, biting through my jacket as I stepped out of the car and stretched my stiff muscles. All right, time to face the music, I muttered to myself. Walking up to the front door, I hesitated for just a second before knocking. The familiar creak of the floorboards inside told me someone was coming. A moment later, the door swung open, and there she was, my mom. She looked older, tired, and worn down, but her eyes still lit up the second she saw me. "Ethan," she gasped, covering her mouth in shock. "I cannot believe you came." "Of course, I came, Mom," I said, stepping inside and wrapping my arms around her. She clung to me tightly, her body shaking with sobs. "I am here for Dad's funeral," I whispered into her hair, holding back my own emotions. The house smelled the same, like fresh-baked bread and old memories. Nothing much had changed, but it felt like a different world. I could hear the muffled voices of my sisters from the dining room, and my mom pulled back, dabbing her eyes with the back of her hand. "Your sisters are here too," she said, trying to sound cheerful, but I could tell it was hard for her. I nodded and followed her down the narrow hallway to the dining room. The second I stepped in, the room went silent. It was like a switch had been flipped. My oldest sister, Sarah, looked up, eyes wide with surprise. "Ethan, I cannot believe it," she said softly, standing up to hug me. "Hey, Sarah," I replied, giving her a quick hug before turning to my younger sister, Beth, who stayed seated with her arms crossed. "What are you doing here?" Beth asked coldly, not bothering to get up. I clenched my jaw. "I came for the funeral. What else would I be here for?" Beth narrowed her eyes, still refusing to move from her seat. "After 10 years, you think you can just waltz back and like everything is fine? You did not care about any of us all this time. Why bother showing up now?" Sarah shot her a warning look, but I could tell that Beth had been holding on to this anger for a long time. Before I could respond, a little boy ran into the room, his sneakers squeaking against the hardwood floor. "Gran, come quick. Someone's on the phone for you." Mom excused herself, giving my arm a soft pat as she left to answer the call. The little boy, who must have been Beth's son, flashed a quick smile at me before disappearing back down the hallway. Sarah and I exchanged an awkward glance before she spoke. "Look, Ethan, we are all just surprised to see you." No one thought you would actually come. Well, I did, I replied, forcing a smile. Before we could continue, Mom came back into the room, wiping her hands on her apron. Sorry about that. Now, who wants something to eat? I made a fresh apple pie. None for me, thanks, I said. I just wanted to say hello and offer my help with whatever you need for Dad's service. Mom gave me a long, hard look. How did you find out about your father? Uncle John called me, I said. Her brow furrowed. He knew how to reach you. I nodded. He had my number for emergencies. Mom's face softened, but I could tell there was something she wanted to say. He never told me he had your number. I asked him not to, I said. I didn't want any drama. But let us not make this about me. We have enough to deal with right now. The tension in the room was thick, and I could feel Beth's eyes burning into the back of my head. I let out a sigh, realizing it was probably best to leave for the moment. I think I will go find a hotel in town, I said, stepping toward the door. You can stay here, Ethan, Mom insisted. This is your home. Mom, it is fine, I said quickly, not wanting to cause a scene. I will be close by. No need to worry. Beth's voice cut through the air like a knife. Good. There is no room for you here anyway. Sarah rolled her eyes, trying to defuse the situation. Beth, stop it. I gave them both a tired smile and turned to leave. I will be back later, I said, grabbing my bag and stepping out into the cold air. As I walked back to my car, the weight of everything settled onto my shoulders. This was not going to be easy. And on top of that, I had no idea how I was going to deal with seeing her again, Megan, my ex-wife. The one who had ripped my heart out and stomped all over it. From what I heard, she had been staying close to my family ever since I left, like nothing had ever happened between us. That thought alone made my blood boil all over again. I had sworn to myself that I would never forgive her, never forget the pain she caused me. But now, here I was, being dragged back into the mess I thought I had escaped from. And whether I liked it or not, I knew that facing her again was inevitable. I drove through the small town, the one I had spent my entire life trying to forget. Every street, every storefront, every damn tree brought back memories I was not ready to face. 10 years might sound like a long time, but not long enough to erase what happened. Especially not what Megan had done to me. That image, her in bed with Derek, was burned into my mind like a scar that never healed. I had loved her, and I had trusted Derek. I never saw it coming. I found a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. It looked like the kind of place where the lights flickered, and the walls smelled like cigarette smoke from decades ago. But it was good enough for the night. I checked in and tossed my bag onto the bed, collapsing next to it. The drive had worn me out more than I thought, and my head was spinning with all the memories that had come rushing back. I closed my eyes, trying to shake it off, but my mind kept pulling me back. I could see my dad, standing in the doorway of my old house, begging me to stay and work things out with Megan. I had told him there was no going back after what she had done. He was never the same after that, and neither was I. Just when I thought I was starting to relax, my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Hey," she said when I picked up. "I know things were tense back there, but I want to see you. It has been too long." "Yeah, it has," I admitted, feeling a pang of guilt. "I will stop by tomorrow." "Beth can be a pain, but she will come around," Sarah said, her voice soft. "She is just angry because you left without saying goodbye." I knew Sarah was right, but it did not make it any easier. I left because I had to. Staying in that town, surrounded by people who knew my business, watching my family act like Megan was still one of us, that was too much for me to handle. I thought putting miles between us would help me forget, but instead, It only made the pain fester. "Thanks, Sarah. I will see you tomorrow," I said, ending the call. I tossed the phone on the bed and rubbed my face with my hands, trying to erase the weariness. Lying there, I could not help but think about Megan. She had been everything to me once. We grew up together, childhood friends who became high school sweethearts. I still remembered the way her soft brown hair would fall over her shoulders, the way she would laugh when I said something stupid. We had built a life together, or at least I thought we had. After 2 years of marriage, everything crumbled. And it all happened in a single moment. I came home from work early one day to grab my tools. I will never forget that sight. Megan's legs wrapped around Derek, her breathy gasps, the way their bodies tangled together, oblivious to me standing there. For a few seconds, I was paralyzed, like I could not believe what I was seeing. But then the rage hit. I yelled, screamed at them both, but Megan barely even flinched. Derek had that guilty look on his face, but Megan? She looked embarrassed, but there was no regret. No apology in her eyes. Just shock at being caught. I lost it. I lunged at Derek, fists flying. It took 3 neighbors to pull me off him. The next thing I knew, I was standing in court, facing charges of assault. The only thing that saved me from jail was my dad, who spoke to the judge, vouching for me. He said it was an isolated incident, that I had just snapped from the betrayal. The judge must have felt sorry for me, because I got off with community service instead of time behind bars. But even that was not enough to fix what Megan had done to me. I rolled over on the bed, staring up at the cracked ceiling. She had tried to apologize afterward, begged me to listen, but I was done. The minute I walked out of that house, I knew there was no going back. I packed her stuff, dumped it on the lawn, and filed for divorce the next day. What made it worse was that my family did not support me the way I needed them to. My dad kept telling me to give her another chance, to remember our vows. Even my sisters tried to convince me that Megan was sorry, that she had made a mistake and deserved forgiveness. But how could I forgive that? I could not. I would not. So I left. I thought about that night often, how it changed everything, how it broke me. And now, after all these years, I was going to have to face her again. I had heard from Sarah that Megan still lived in town, and that she was close to my family, even after everything. She had weaseled her way into their lives, becoming some kind of fixture. I could feel my pulse quicken just thinking about it. I tried to distract myself by turning on the TV, flipping through the channels, but nothing held my attention. It was all just noise in the background. I could not stop thinking about her, about how I would handle seeing her again. My hands gripped the blanket, knuckles white from the tension. The next morning, I got up early, took a shower, and tried to look presentable. I figured it would not hurt to show my family that I was doing well. I grabbed a quick breakfast from a diner down the street, ignoring the stares of the locals. In a small town like this, everyone knew everyone's business, and I could tell they had not forgotten me. I made my way back to the house. As I pulled into the driveway, I took a deep breath. This was it. Time to face the past. I could already hear voices inside, the low hum of conversation mixed with occasional laughter. I opened the door and stepped inside, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. "Ethan, you made it," Sarah called out from the kitchen, a smile on her face as she wiped her hands on a towel. I gave her a quick nod and made my way to the dining room, where Beth was sitting with her arms crossed, still giving me the cold shoulder. But I barely noticed her. Because standing at the far end of the room, her eyes locking onto mine, was Megan. My heart pounded in my chest. There she was, just like I remembered. Her hair was pulled back, and she wore a soft sweater that clung to her curves. She looked nervous, like she had not expected to see me either. "Megan," I said, my voice flat. "Ethan," she whispered, taking a step toward me. The air between us was thick, charged with everything we had never said. My body tensed, ready for a fight, but at the same time, there was something else, a feeling I had not anticipated. Seeing her again stirred something inside me. Something I thought I had buried a long time ago. Standing face to face with Megan after all these years, I felt a mix of emotions I was not prepared for. The anger, that deep, festering rage from the betrayal, was still there. But there was something else too, something I hated to admit. Desire. As I looked into her eyes, memories came flooding back. Not just the betrayal, but the moments we had shared before everything fell apart. The nights when it was just her and me, wrapped up in each other, tangled in sheets, and the world outside felt like it did not exist. She took another step closer, her eyes searching mine for some kind of sign. "Ethan. I did not think you would come," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. I clenched my jaw, the sound of her voice like a dagger in my chest. I wanted to tell her to leave, to get out of my sight, but the words would not come. All I could do was stand there, staring at her, feeling that pull, the one I thought I had left behind. Sarah, sensing the tension, quickly intervened. "Hey, why do not we all sit down, have some coffee?" she said, trying to keep things light. Megan's eyes flickered to Sarah for a moment, and then back to me. I just came to drop off some things for your mom. I didn't mean to. I didn't expect this." I gave a stiff nod, still not trusting myself to speak. Beth rolled her eyes, muttering something under her breath, but I ignored her. My focus was solely on Megan. I watched her move across the room, her hips swaying slightly as she set a small basket on the kitchen counter. Every movement, every subtle gesture reminded me of the time we had spent together, the way she used to tease me, the way she would pull me close when she wanted something. It was infuriating. The silence hung in the air, awkward and heavy, until finally, I broke it. "What are you still doing here, Megan?" The question came out sharper than I intended, but I could not help it. Megan's shoulders tensed, and she turned to face me, a flicker of hurt crossing her face. "I live here. I never left." I shook my head in disbelief. "You live here? In this town?" She nodded, her eyes meeting mine again. "I stayed close to your family. They were there for me after everything." "That's rich," I said, bitterness dripping from my words. "They were there for you. Not me. You betrayed me, Megan. You tore everything apart, and they took your side." Megan winced at my words, but she stood her ground. "I know what I did, Ethan. I have spent every day since then regretting it. But I didn't leave because I wanted to make things right. I thought maybe, if I stayed, I could at least help your family in some way." "Help my family?" I laughed bitterly. "By staying close to them, pretending like you belong here?" "Stop it, Ethan," Sarah cut in, her voice firm. "This isn't the time for this. We're here for Dad, remember?" I clenched my fists at my sides, trying to control the surge of anger rising inside me. Sarah was right, but damn it, seeing Megan like this, calm, collected, like she had moved on without a care, it was too much. Megan took a deep breath, her eyes softening. "I didn't come here to fight, Ethan. I just wanted to pay my respects in." "Pay your respects?" I snapped. "To who, Megan?" "To the man who thought you were part of this family, even after what you did." Her lips parted, but she did not say anything. The silence between us felt like a chasm, widening with each passing second. Finally, she looked away, her voice small. "I know I don't have the right to be here, but your dad, he was good to me. He believed in second chances." I scoffed, shaking my head. Well, I am not my father. Megan swallowed hard, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I know. There was a part of me that wanted to leave, to walk out of that house and never look back. But there was another part, one that wanted answers. One that wanted to know why she did it. Why she had thrown everything away. Before I could stop myself, I asked the question that had haunted me for years. Why, Megan? Why did you do it? She looked up at me, her eyes filled with guilt. For a long moment, she did not say anything. And then, finally, she whispered, I don't know. I don't know why I did it. That's not good enough, I growled, stepping closer to her. You had everything. We had everything. And you threw it away for him? For Derek? Her lip quivered as she shook her head. I wasn't thinking. I was lonely, and he was there. It was a mistake, Ethan. A terrible, awful mistake. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my blood boiling with the memory of that day. I wanted to scream at her, to make her feel the same pain she had caused me. But as I stood there, staring into her tear-filled eyes, something in me shifted. I had spent so long being angry at her, at Derek, at my family for not supporting me. But now, after all these years, I realized something. I was tired. Tired of carrying that anger around with me, tired of letting it control my life. I took a step back, exhaling slowly. It doesn't matter, I said, my voice quieter now. None of it matters anymore. Megan blinked, a tear slipping down her cheek. I am sorry, Ethan. I really am. I looked at her for a long moment, my chest tight. And then, without another word, I turned and walked out of the house. I needed air. I needed space. The cold breeze hit me as soon as I stepped outside, and I took a deep breath, trying to clear my head. Everything felt too close, too overwhelming. I walked down the driveway, my hands stuffed in my pockets, and kept walking until the house was far behind me. For the first time in years, I did not know what to do next. I walked aimlessly through the quiet streets, my mind swirling with thoughts I could not contain. The cold air felt good against my skin, like it was cooling the fire that had been raging inside me for years. I had imagined this moment for so long, the day I would finally confront Megan, demand answers, and make her feel the same pain she had inflicted on me. But standing there, looking into her eyes, all that anger seemed to dissolve into something else. I was not sure what it was. Resignation, maybe. Exhaustion, definitely. I had no idea where I was going. I just kept walking, putting as much distance between me and that house as possible. My mind replayed the conversation over and over, her voice soft in my ears, her apology lingering like a bad taste. She said she did not know why she had done it, and maybe she did not. Maybe she was just as lost as I was back then. I found myself standing in front of an old bar that I used to go to with Derek. The irony of it made me laugh bitterly. I almost turned around, but something pulled me inside. It was dark and quiet, the kind of place where people came to forget, not to talk. I slid onto a bar stool and ordered a whiskey, needing something strong to calm my nerves. As I sipped my drink, I thought about Derek. My so-called best friend. The guy who had been there for me through thick and thin, who knew everything about me and Megan. He had watched us fall in love, stood by my side at the wedding, and then, somehow, thought it was okay to betray me. The worst part was, after the fight, he had never reached out. Not once. No apology, no explanation. Nothing. He had just disappeared. Another? The bartender asked, snapping me out of my thoughts. I nodded, sliding my empty glass across the counter. The whiskey burned on the way down, but it felt good. I needed to feel something other than anger or hurt. "Rough day," a voice next to me said. I turned to see a woman sitting a few stools over, nursing a drink of her own. She was pretty in a kind of understated way, blonde hair pulled back, a simple sweater that hugged her curves. Her eyes were sharp, like she could see right through me, and for some reason, I found that both comforting and unsettling at the same time. "You could say that," I replied, taking another sip. I was not in the mood for conversation, but something about her made it hard to turn away. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, already sliding over before I could answer. I shrugged, not really caring either way. "It's a free country." She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "I know that look. You're going through something. Want to talk about it?" I shook my head. "Not really." She raised an eyebrow, clearly not convinced. "Let me guess. Woman trouble?" I laughed, a bitter sound that came from deep inside. "Something like that." "Yeah, I get it," she said, taking a sip of her drink. "Men are not so different, you know. They have a way of getting inside your head and messing with everything you thought you knew." "Trust me," I muttered, "I know all about that." We sat in silence for a while, the noise of the bar filling the space between us. I did not want to talk, but there was something about her that made me feel like I did not have to. Like she understood without me having to explain. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Sometimes, the only way to deal with the past is to face it head-on. Even when it hurts like hell." Her words hit me harder than I expected, and I found myself thinking about Megan again. Was I really facing anything by walking out of that house? Or was I just running like I had been for the last 10 years? I had thought leaving town was the solution, but all it had done was leave everything unresolved. What do you do when you face it, and it does not make anything better? I asked, more to myself than to her. "You keep going," she said simply. "Because there is no other choice." I glanced at her, surprised by the honesty in her words. She was not trying to sugarcoat anything, and I respected that. I had spent so long pretending like I was fine, like I had moved on, but the truth was, I was stuck. Stuck in the past, stuck in that moment when everything fell apart. Her hand brushed against mine as she reached for her drink, and for a second, I felt something, a spark, a connection. It had been so long since I had felt that with anyone. Her fingers lingered just a moment longer than necessary, and I found myself looking into her eyes. They were deep, curious, like they wanted to know what was going on inside my head. I cleared my throat, pulling my hand back, feeling a sudden surge of guilt. What the hell was I doing? I was not here to make new connections or to let anyone in. I was here to bury my father and figure out how to move on. But even as I told myself that, part of me could not shake the feeling that maybe I had been alone for too long. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to steer the conversation into safer territory. "Abby," she said with a smile, her eyes never leaving mine. "And you?" "Ethan." She swirled her drink, her gaze still locked on me. "So, Ethan, what are you running from?" Her question hung in the air, and for the first time in years, I found myself at a loss for words. What was I running from? Megan? My family? Myself? Before I could answer, the door to the bar swung open, and in walked someone I had not seen in years. Derek. My stomach tightened, and the glass in my hand trembled as I set it down on the counter. He had not changed much, still the same cocky swagger, still the same smirk. The only difference now was that I no longer felt the warmth of friendship when I looked at him. I only felt rage. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. Abby's eyes widened as she noticed the sudden change in my demeanor. "What is it?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "That," I said, nodding toward Derek, "is the man I have been running from." My blood went cold when I saw him. Derek. The man who had once been my best friend, the guy I would have trusted with my life, and the one who had stabbed me in the back without so much as a second thought. It had been years, but seeing him now, that old anger flared up inside me like a fire that had never really gone out. He had not noticed me yet, but I could see him scanning the room, casually looking around like he had not a care in the world. It was like nothing had changed for him. Meanwhile, I had been carrying the weight of his betrayal for a decade. I could feel Abby's eyes on me, concerned and curious, but I was barely aware of her at this point. Everything in me was focused on Derek. Without thinking, I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Abby grabbed my arm, trying to pull me back. "Ethan, wait. Don't do anything stupid." I glanced at her, but my body was already moving. I could not stop it. My fists clenched at my sides as I marched across the room, my heart pounding in my ears. Derek turned just as I got close, his eyes widening in surprise when he saw me. "Ethan," he said, his voice unsure. "Holy shit, man. I didn't think." I did not let him finish. My fist connected with his jaw before he could even get another word out. He stumbled back, crashing into a nearby table, knocking over drinks and chairs. The room went dead silent. All eyes were on us now, but I did not care. I had been waiting for this moment for 10 years. Derek wiped the blood from his mouth, looking more shocked than hurt. "Jesus, Ethan. What the hell, man? What the hell?" I growled, stepping closer. "You're asking me what the hell? After everything you did?" He raised his hands defensively, trying to calm me down. "Hey, look, I know I screwed up, all right? But it's been a long time. You can't still be pissed about that." I laughed bitterly. "You think time just makes it all go away? You think I'm supposed to forget that you slept with my wife? That you destroyed everything?" Derek's face hardened, but there was a flicker of guilt in his eyes. "I'm not saying what I did was right, but come on, man. It was 10 years ago. We were all messed up back then." "Messed up?" I took another step toward him, my fists itching to swing again. "I loved her, Derek. I trusted you. You were my best friend." "I know," he said, his voice softer now, like he was trying to reason with me. "I know, and I'm sorry. I've thought about it every day since. But you disappeared, man. You left, and I didn't know how to fix it." "There was nothing to fix," I spat. "You betrayed me. Both of you." Derek rubbed the back of his neck, looking down at the floor. "I never wanted to hurt you, Ethan. It just happened. One stupid night, and I've regretted it ever since." I shook my head, the rage bubbling up again. "You expect me to believe that? You expect me to forgive you because you feel bad?" He met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw something real there. Not just guilt, but shame. "No, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know that I'm sorry." For a moment, I stood there, staring at him, my chest heaving with the effort it took to control my anger. Part of me wanted to keep swinging, to knock him out cold, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain I had been carrying for years. But another part of me just wanted to walk away. I was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of being angry. "Ethan," Abby's voice was soft behind me, her hand gently resting on my arm. "It's not worth it." I could feel the eyes of everyone in the bar watching us, waiting to see what I would do next. Derek stood there, his hands still raised in a gesture of surrender, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. I took a deep breath, my fists loosening at my sides. "You're right, Abby," I muttered. "He's not worth it." Derek looked up, relief flickering across his face. Thanks, man. I... Don't thank me, I snapped, cutting him off. We're not friends. We never will be. You're nothing to me now. The words hit him like a punch, and I could see the pain in his eyes. But I did not care. He had made his choices, and now he had to live with the consequences. I turned and walked back toward the bar, Abby by my side. I could feel the tension slowly easing from my shoulders as I put more distance between me and Derek. He did not try to follow. He knew better. Abby looked up at me as we sat down, her eyes full of concern. Are you okay? I nodded, though I was not sure if that was the truth. Yeah. I'm fine. We sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the bar gradually returning as the patrons realized the show was over. I could feel the adrenaline still coursing through my veins, my hands shaking slightly from the confrontation. But at the same time, there was a strange sense of relief. I had finally faced Derek, finally said what I needed to say. And it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But there was still Megan. I had confronted Derek, but she was the one who had really broken me. And I knew, deep down, that I could not just walk away without facing her too. I need to see her, I muttered, almost to myself. Abby frowned, tilting her head. Who? Megan, I said, my voice steady, but my heart pounding. I need to talk to her. Abby looked at me for a long moment, as if she was trying to understand what was going on inside my head. Finally, she nodded. Do you want me to come with you? I shook my head. No. This is something I need to do on my own. She nodded again, her fingers brushing lightly against my hand. Just be careful, Ethan. This stuff, it can mess with your head. I've seen it before. I gave her a small, tired smile. Yeah, I know. But I've been carrying this around long enough. It's time to let it go. With that, I stood up, leaving some cash on the bar, and made my way toward the door. The night air hit me like a slap in the face, cold and biting, but it cleared my mind. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension in my chest loosen just a little. I had no idea what I was going to say to Megan, or how this would end, but I knew one thing: I could not keep running. The drive to Megan's house felt surreal. My hands were steady on the wheel, but inside, I was churning. I had not been to her place since the day I walked out of her life, leaving everything behind, the memories, the pain, the betrayal. Now, I was about to walk back into it, and I had no idea what I was hoping to find. I pulled up outside the house she had shared with my family after I left. The lights were on, a soft glow spilling through the windows, and the sight of it sent a shiver down my spine. For years, I had imagined her life without me. What it was like for her after I left. Did she regret it? Did she miss me? Or had she moved on completely, erasing me from her life just as easily as she had betrayed me? I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the front door, debating whether or not to actually go through with this. I could still turn around, leave, and never look back. But then I thought of Dylan, my son. I could not leave things unresolved anymore. He deserved better than that, and maybe I did too. With a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and walked up to the door. My heart pounded in my chest as I raised my hand to knock. I was not ready for this, but I knew there was no backing down now. The sound of my knuckles rapping against the wood seemed to echo in the stillness of the night. The door opened, and there she was, Megan, standing in the doorway, looking as beautiful and haunted as she had the day I left. Her long brown hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, her green eyes wide with surprise as she took in the sight of me. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. "Megan," I replied, my own voice barely above a whisper. I could see the shock in her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she held the door open. For a long moment, We just stood there, neither of us knowing what to say. Finally, she stepped aside. "Do you want to come in?" I nodded and walked inside, the familiar smell of the house washing over me. It was the same as I remembered, cozy, warm, and full of memories I had tried to forget. I could hear the distant hum of a TV from the living room, probably Dylan watching some cartoon before bed. My heart ached at the thought of him, my son, growing up without me. I had missed so much. Megan closed the door behind me, and I turned to face her, the tension between us thick, almost unbearable. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said softly, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. I didn't think you'd ever come back." "I didn't think I would either," I admitted, my voice rough. "But things change." Her eyes flickered to the floor, and I could see the guilt in her expression. She knew what I was here for. She knew this moment had been coming for a long time. "Ethan, I know I hurt you," she began, her voice shaking. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I wouldn't blame you if you never wanted to see me again. But I'm so sorry for what I did." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my emotions in check. "You broke me, Megan. You broke everything we had." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I know I did, and I regret it every single day. I've spent years hating myself for what I did to you, for the way I ruined everything. But it's too late for apologies. I know that." "Why did you do it?" I asked, my voice low but firm. It was the question I had been asking myself for 10 years, the question that had haunted me every day since I walked in on her with Derek. "Why him? Why would you throw everything away for him?" Megan's tears spilled over as she shook her head. "I don't have a good answer, Ethan. I wish I did. I was lonely, and he was there, and I made the worst mistake of my life. It wasn't about him. It wasn't even about us. It was about me, and how messed up I was at the time. I didn't think about the consequences. I didn't think about what it would do to you." I stared at her, my chest tight with emotion. "And you never thought to fix it? You never thought to tell me the truth, to explain why you did it?" "I tried," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I tried to talk to you, but you were already gone. You shut me out completely, and I don't blame you. I deserved it." The room felt smaller, the air thick with everything unsaid between us. I took a step closer to her, and she looked up at me, tears still streaming down her cheeks. "You know what the worst part was?" I asked, my voice cracking. "It wasn't just that you cheated on me. It was that you destroyed everything we had built. You took away the life we were supposed to have together." Megan sobbed quietly, her hand covering her mouth as she tried to hold herself together. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I know I can't fix it. I know I can't undo what I did. But I never stopped loving you. Not for a second." Her words hit me hard, and for a moment, I did not know what to say. I had spent so long hating her, so long telling myself that I would never forgive her, but now that I was here, standing in front of her, all that anger seemed to melt away. What was the point of holding on to it? It had not made me happier. It had not made me stronger. It had only made me bitter. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of pain and resentment lift from my shoulders. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Megan," I said quietly. "But I don't want to hate you anymore." She looked up at me, hope flickering in her tear-filled eyes. "I understand." We stood there in silence, the distance between us both physical and emotional, but something had shifted. Maybe it was not forgiveness, but it was something close to it. A beginning. A small step toward healing. And then, from the living room, I heard the sound of tiny footsteps. Dylan appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes, his hair tousled from sleep. "Mom," he mumbled, looking between the two of us. His eyes landed on me, and for a moment, he just stared. "Who's that?" Megan wiped her tears quickly and forced a smile. "Dylan, honey, this is Ethan. He's your dad." The words hung in the air, and I felt like the world had stopped spinning. Dylan's eyes grew wide, and he took a small step toward me, his tiny hands clutching the edge of his pajamas. "You're my dad?" he asked softly, his voice full of wonder and confusion. I knelt down so I was eye level with him, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yeah, buddy. I'm your dad." For a long moment, Dylan just stared at me, his little face scrunched up in thought. And then, without warning, he rushed forward and threw his arms around my neck, holding on tightly. The feel of his small body against mine was overwhelming, and I wrapped my arms around him, my throat tight with emotion. In that moment, everything else faded away, the pain, the anger, the betrayal. All that mattered was the boy in my arms. My son. Megan stood off to the side, watching us with tears in her eyes. And for the first time in years, I felt something like peace. Holding Dylan in my arms felt like the most real moment I had experienced in years. His small body pressed against mine, his little arms squeezing me as if he was afraid I might vanish if he let go. I could not even breathe for a moment, overwhelmed by the connection I had been missing for so long. This was my son, my flesh and blood, and for 10 years, I had not been there for him. I held him tighter, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm so sorry, buddy," I whispered into his hair. "I'm sorry I wasn't here." Dylan pulled back slightly, looking up at me with wide, curious eyes. "Why weren't you here, Dad? Why didn't I know about you?" His innocent question cut through me like a knife. I glanced up at Megan, who stood a few feet away, watching us with a mix of hope and sadness. She wiped at her eyes, trying to stay composed, but I could see the guilt written all over her face. This was a conversation we both needed to have, but it was not going to be easy. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. "It's complicated, Dylan. I didn't know about you. I was gone for a while, but I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere." He nodded, accepting my answer, but I could tell there were still a lot of questions swirling in his mind. I kissed the top of his head, feeling a lump rise in my throat. How could I explain the mess that had torn our family apart without confusing him more? He was just a kid, he did not need to carry the weight of our mistakes. Megan stepped forward cautiously, her voice soft. "Dylan, honey, it's late. Why don't you go back to bed, and we'll talk more in the morning, okay?" Dylan hesitated, glancing between the two of us, like he was afraid this might all disappear if he went to sleep. "Will you still be here when I wake up?" he asked, looking up at me. I smiled, my heart aching with the weight of his words. "Yeah, buddy. I'll be here." Satisfied with that answer, Dylan gave me one last hug before shuffling back toward his room, his little footsteps fading down the hallway. Megan and I stood in silence for a moment, the reality of the situation settling over us. It was like the air had changed between us, less hostile but still heavy with everything unsaid. Megan took a shaky breath, folding her arms across her chest as if she was trying to protect herself from the cold. "He's a good kid, Ethan," she said quietly. "You would have been proud of him." "I am proud," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. I wish I had known. I wish I could have been there for him." "I know," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears again. "I should have told you. But after everything that happened, I didn't know how. I was scared." "Scared of what?" I asked, my frustration slipping through. "That I'd hate you more? That I'd walk away and leave you with all of this?" Megan shook her head, her tears spilling over. "No, I was scared of hurting him. I didn't want him to grow up in the middle of our mess. I didn't want him to feel torn between us. And I knew you were angry, Ethan. I knew how much I'd hurt you, and I didn't know if you'd ever want to be a part of his life after what I did. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my emotions in check. I should have been given that choice, Megan. You don't get to decide that for me. You're right, she admitted, her voice breaking. You're right, and I'm sorry. I was wrong. I didn't know how to fix anything after I ruined it all. For a long moment, we just stood there, the silence between us heavy and painful. She looked so fragile in that moment, like she was waiting for me to lash out at her again, but I was too tired to fight anymore. I had spent too long being angry, too long running from the truth. I'm not here to punish you, Megan, I said finally, my voice soft but firm. I just want to figure out how to be in Dylan's life. He deserves that. Megan wiped her eyes, nodding. I want that too. I want him to know his father. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. But it's not going to be easy. We've got a lot of history, and I don't know how we're going to make this work. I know, she said quietly. But we'll figure it out. For him. We stood in silence again, the weight of our shared past hanging over us like a storm cloud. There was so much damage between us, so much that had been left unresolved for years, but now we had a reason to put it behind us. Dylan. He was the only thing that mattered now. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was late, and I could feel the exhaustion creeping up on me. I should go, I muttered, turning toward the door. I'll come by tomorrow, and we can figure out a plan. Megan nodded, biting her lip as she watched me move toward the exit. Ethan, thank you for coming. I didn't think you ever would. I paused at the door, my hand resting on the knob. I didn't either, I admitted, turning back to face her. But Dylan, he deserves to know his dad. And maybe, I deserve a chance to be one. The truth of my words hung in the air between us, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally starting to move forward. I had spent too many years stuck in the past, haunted by what had happened between me and Megan. But now, there was something bigger at stake. Something worth fighting for. I stepped outside, the cool night air washing over me as I walked to my car. The town was quiet, still, and as I climbed into the driver's seat, I let out a long breath, feeling the weight on my chest lighten just a little. I had taken the first step. It was not forgiveness, not by a long shot, but it was a start. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. As I drove away, I could not help but think about the road ahead. I had no idea what the future held, no idea how things would work out with Dylan or with Megan. But I knew one thing for sure, I was not running anymore. I was going to face whatever came next, one day at a time. And as I glanced up at the stars through the windshield, I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something better. Not perfect, but better. The next morning felt different. There was a kind of clarity I had not felt in a long time, like I had finally taken the first steps out of a fog that had clouded my mind for years. As I drove back toward Megan's house, the small town roads seemed less suffocating, less full of ghosts from my past. I knew there were still challenges ahead, but for the first time, I felt ready to face them. When I arrived at Megan's place, I parked the car and sat there for a moment, taking a deep breath. This time, it felt different, like I was stepping into something new, something that, even though painful, might offer a chance for healing. I knocked on the door, and this time, it opened almost immediately. Megan stood there, looking more composed than the night before. Her eyes still held the weight of everything between us, but there was a softness in her expression now, a fragile peace that seemed to settle over her. "Morning," she said, her voice a little hesitant, but warmer than before. "Morning," I replied. I nodded toward the house. Is Dylan up yet? She smiled slightly, stepping aside to let me in. He's in the kitchen, eating breakfast. I told him you'd be here. As I walked into the house, I could hear Dylan's voice, humming something quietly as he sat at the table. The sight of him, so small, so full of life, hit me all over again. He looked up when he saw me, his face lighting up in a way that made my heart ache with both regret and hope. "Dad," he exclaimed, his smile wide. He scrambled out of his chair, running over to me with the same excitement he had shown the night before. He threw his arms around my waist, and I knelt down to hug him, letting the warmth of his embrace sink into me. "Hey, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. "How's breakfast?" "Good. Mom made pancakes," he said, his voice full of the kind of joy only a kid could have. "Want some?" I chuckled, glancing over at Megan, who was standing by the kitchen counter, watching us with a mixture of emotions. "I could eat." Megan nodded toward the table, her smile a little more relaxed. "There's plenty. Sit down, I'll get you some." As I sat at the table with Dylan, something strange happened. The tension that had hung between Megan and me for so long seemed to fade, if only for a moment. We talked about simple things, school, games, how Dylan wanted to learn to ride a bike. It felt normal, like a family sharing breakfast on a Saturday morning. And for the first time, I realized that this could be our life now, different, yes, but something we could build on. After breakfast, Megan and I took Dylan to the park, where he ran ahead of us, his little legs carrying him toward the playground like it was the most exciting place in the world. Megan and I followed behind, keeping our distance but staying close enough to watch him. The sun was warm, and the air felt fresh, like the start of something new. "He really likes you," Megan said softly, her eyes on Dylan as he climbed the jungle gym. I glanced at her, nodding. "I like him too. He's a great kid." She sighed, a small smile playing on her lips. "He's been asking about you for a while now." I didn't know what to tell him. I was afraid he'd hate me when he found out I kept you from him. I shook my head, looking at her seriously. "He doesn't hate you, Megan. He's a kid. He just wants to know his dad. And now that I'm here, we can figure this out." She looked down, her fingers nervously playing with the edge of her sweater. "I've made a lot of mistakes, Ethan. I don't expect you to forgive me, and I'm not asking for that. But I do want to find a way to move forward, for Dylan's sake." "I know," I said, my voice calm but firm. "And I'm not asking for everything to be fixed overnight. But we can take it one step at a time. I want to be in his life, Megan. I don't want to miss any more." Her eyes flicked to mine, and for the first time, there was a flicker of hope there. It was not much, but it was something. We watched Dylan play for a while longer, the sound of his laughter filling the air. And in that moment, I realized something important. I could hate Megan for the rest of my life. I could hold on to the anger and the pain, but it would not change anything. It would not bring back the years I had lost with my son. It would not make the betrayal go away. But letting go, finding a way to work together for Dylan, that was something I could control. That was something that could make a difference. As the afternoon went on, we took Dylan for ice cream, something so simple yet so meaningful. It felt like the beginning of something fragile but promising, like we were slowly finding a way to be in each other's lives without all the old wounds constantly reopening. There was no denying that the scars were there, but maybe they did not have to define us anymore. When it was time to leave, Dylan clung to my leg, asking when I would come back. "Soon, buddy," I promised, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "I'll be back soon." He looked up at me with wide, trusting eyes. "You promise?" "I promise," I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. And for the first time in a long time, I meant it. Megan stood nearby, watching us with a look that was hard to read. She seemed relieved, but there was still so much unsaid between us. But that was okay. We had time to figure it out. As I drove away from her house, I felt something I had not felt in years: hope. It was not going to be easy, and there were still a lot of things we needed to work through, but I was not running anymore. I was facing it, one step at a time. Over the next few weeks, I visited Dylan regularly. We played catch, went to the park, and just hung out, getting to know each other. It was awkward at first, but with each visit, it became easier. Megan was always there, watching us from a distance, but she gave us space, allowing me and Dylan to build something real. Something I had feared I would never have. One afternoon, after we had spent the day together, I sat down with Megan on the porch, watching Dylan play in the yard. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over everything, and for a moment, it felt like we were on the verge of something new. "You're doing a good job with him," Megan said quietly, her voice soft but sincere. "Thanks," I replied, feeling a warmth spread through me. "I'm just trying to make up for lost time." She nodded, her eyes on Dylan. "You're doing more than that. He's happier than I've seen him in a long time." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of our past still there but lighter now. I looked at her, wondering how we had come from being so close to this, two people trying to rebuild something from the wreckage. It was not what I had imagined for us, but it was better than the anger that had consumed me for so long. "You know," Megan said, her voice tentative, "I don't know what the future holds for us. But I think we can make this work." "For Dylan." I nodded, looking out at the yard. "Yeah. For Dylan." And in that moment, I knew we were going to be okay. It would not be easy, and it would not be perfect, but we were moving forward. Together.